The Galactic Deathworld Council chamber was built to intimidate. It was a cavernous space, a monument to fear and power. The walls were hewn from black stone, remnants of planets crushed under the Council's iron fist. Above, the ceiling wasn't a static dome, but a swirling canvas of moving stars, constellations of conquered systems, interspersed with glowing, ancient warning symbols that pulsed with a malevolent light. Every sound, no matter how small, was amplified, echoing through the vastness until even the silence felt heavy, oppressive. Further down, the Skarn warlord, a creature whose species hunted each other for ritual and sport, tapped its razor-sharp talons on its obsidian throne. These were beings who had stared into the abyss and made the abyss blink first. They feared nothing. Until today, in the dead center of this intimidating chamber stood a single, unadorned table. It was a stark contrast to the grandeur around it. No force fields shimmered around it. No armed guards flanked it. And at this table sat one lone figure, a human. He idly tapped his fingers on the table, his gaze wandering across the terrifying celestial display on the ceiling. The silence stretched on, thick and charged. Its voice was not merely sound, it was a physical force, a deep resonance that shook the very foundations of the chamber. The human stopped tapping his fingers and brought his gaze down from the ceiling. He nodded slowly, a small, almost lazy motion. "Yes," he replied, his voice clear and untroubled. "Long meeting. Hard chairs." A low growl rumbled from the Cathar regent's throne. Several other council members shifted, their equivalent of leaning forward in interest. This was not the response they had expected. The Arbiter's crystalline form shimmered with irritation. "Your species is young. Your technology is limited. Your presence here, uninvited, is a grave transgression." Another heavy silence fell. The council had expected groveling, begging, desperate pleas for mercy. They had expected respect born of terror. They were receiving none of it. This nonchalant defiance was more unsettling than any open threat. Before the Arbiter could formulate another booming pronouncement, the human leaned down, reaching for something beside his simple chair. Instantly, the chamber erupted in a silent flurry of action. The Skarn warlord's talons extended with a soft click. The Void Stalker matriarch's eyes glowed with barely contained energy. Defense fields, previously dormant, flickered into existence around half the thrones. Weapons systems, unseen but ever present, charged with a low hum that vibrated through the floor. The air crackled with lethal potential, but the human didn't pull out a hyperphase blaster or a dark matter bomb. He placed a small, unassuming container on the table. It was metal, simple, and completely unmarked. With another casual movement, he unlatched it and lifted the lid. A strange, complex aroma began to waft through the chamber. At first, the council members were just confused. The scent was alien, a mixture of savory, smoky, and something else, something chemically pungent. Then, their personal and environmental sensors began to scream. Red warning lights flashed across the chamber walls, bathing the intimidating symbols in a frantic, pulsing glow. A synthesized voice, cold and emotionless, began to list the threats. Alert. High-concentration toxic compounds detected. Capsaicinoids exceeding lethality thresholds for 98% of known life. Warning. Extreme protein and lipid density registered. Unstable chemical heat levels rising. Threat identified. Unknown biological agents present. Potential for catastrophic. Uncontrolled microbial replication. The Void Stalker matriarch shot to her feet, a rare display of alarm. "That substance," she hissed, her voice like grinding ice. "It's rosolized particles. They would liquefy the internal organs of my species in seconds." A few seats down, a being composed of silicon and gas leaned back, its form wavering. "My homeworld's archives speak of similar compounds," it rasped. "They were used in the Great Blight War. We banned the mere synthesis of such materials after they caused a mass extinction event on 3 separate worlds." The human finally looked up from his container, a flicker of what looked like genuine confusion on his face. He sniffed the air. "Oh," he said, as if just noticing the panic. "Sorry about the smell." He then reached into the container with his bare fingers and picked up a small, dark object. It was twisted, blackened at the edges, and still steaming faintly in the cold, recycled air of the chamber. He held it up for a moment, inspecting it, before popping it into his mouth. Absolute stillness descended upon the Galactic Deathworld Council. Every eye, every sensor, every weapon was locked onto the human. The council members, beings who feasted on radiation and bathed in acid, watched in stunned silence as the small, soft creature began to chew. Their internal scanners, linked to the main chamber systems, were going haywire, focusing all their analytical power on the human's biology. The readouts were impossible. His internal temperature was spiking in localized areas of his digestive tract. His body was being flooded with what their systems identified as a cocktail of poisons, neurotoxins, and mutagens. His metabolic rate flared, processing the complex, dangerous materials at an astonishing speed. Any other known organism would have been convulsing on the floor, its cells dissolving from the inside out. The human, however, just chewed thoughtfully. He swallowed, then let out a small, satisfied sigh. "Ah, that's better," he mumbled to himself. He reached into the container again, this time pulling out a longer, paler stick. He crunched on it loudly. "Is that raw plant fiber?" The Cathar regent rumbled, its voice laced with disbelief. "Coated in the same lethal substance." The human nodded, his mouth full. "Celery. Good for dipping." He gestured with the half-eaten stick towards the container. "Spicy buffalo wings. Freshly made. Still warm, too. Anyone want one? No? Okay, more for me." He continued to eat, casually consuming the biological nightmare from the container. The council watched, their millennia of dominance, their entire concept of what constituted a Deathworlder, being completely upended. They had built an empire on being the toughest, most resilient predators the galaxy had ever known. And now, a soft-skinned newcomer was having a light snack of what they considered a weapon of mass destructi. The High Arbiter slowly settled back into its throne, the vibration ceasing. The warning lights blinked out one by one. A new kind of silence filled the room. It wasn't the silence of intimidation or tension. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated shock. The Arbiter's voice, when it finally spoke again, was noticeably softer, lacking its earlier booming arrogance. "Human," it said, the word now carrying a hint of respect, or perhaps a new kind of fear. "Tell us more about your homeworld." The human picked up another wing, examining it with a critical eye. "Earth, though, it's mostly harmless. You should try our food, though. Some of it can be a real killer." He took a large bite, a small smile playing on his lips, heart rate steady, breathing calm, no signs of pain. The human chewed slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. In the grand chamber of the Deathworld Council, a hush had fallen. One council scientist, a being of crystalline structure, whispered to its colleague, "He is consuming it, directly." The other, a multi-limbed insectoid, whispered back, its antennae twitching nervously, "But it's still active, still dangerous. The readings are off the charts." The Arbiter, a towering figure whose species had conquered worlds of molten rock, lowered its voice, a gravelly sound that echoed with authority. "Human," it said carefully, its multiple eyes fixed on the small container in the human's lab. "What is that substance?" The human swallowed, a small, audible sound in the immense silence. He looked up, seemingly unfazed by the dozens of alien leaders staring at him. "It's lunch," he said simply. The word echoed through the chamber, translated instantly by the linguistic system into 1,000 different languages. Lunch. Several council members didn't understand the translation. It couldn't be right. The linguistic system confirmed it again. A normal, midday meal. A leader from a species known for their boisterous nature laughed nervously. A series of high-pitched clicks. The human smiled slightly, a small quirk of his lips, and a dozen other volatile organic compounds filled the filtered air of the council chamber. On the main view screen, sensors screamed louder. A council member from a gaseous species collapsed in its seat, its form wavering, overwhelmed by the chemical readings alone. Another, a reptilian warrior, hastily activated its personal energy shield, a shimmering bubble of blue light enclosing its chair. The Arbiter had seen enough. It slammed its massive stone-like claw into the polished floor, the impact sending a tremor through the room. The Arbiter spoke slowly now, choosing its words with immense care, as if addressing a creature of immense and unpredictable power. "Our records," it began, "the extensive files we have on your species, show that humans consume mild nutrient blocks, soft plant matter, basic, easily digestible protein." The human raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that," he said, gesturing dismissively with his fork. "That's breakfast." The council did not laugh. There wasn't a single chuckle, not even a nervous click. The silence was absolute, thick with a dawning horror. The human finished chewing the bite in his mouth and neatly wiped his hands on a napkin. "This is normal," he added, trying to be reassuring. "Nothing special. Just something quick I threw together before the meeting." Across the chamber, the council members exchanged silent signals. Frantic, terrified glances flew between them. Fear, a rare emotion in this assembly of apex predators, began to spread like a contagion. If this was a quick meal, what in the galaxy was a full one? A banquet, a feast? The thought was too terrifying to contemplate. The Arbiter signaled to the technicians hovering in the background. "Scan it," it ordered, its voice a low growl. "Scan everything." Power surged through the chamber. Arrays of advanced, non-invasive scanners activated, their invisible beams converging on the human and his lunch. They analyzed the food. Then they analyzed the human. Then they analyzed the interaction between the two. The first results appeared on the central display, and the atmosphere in the room changed from tense to terrified. The data scrolled up the screen in stark, terrifying numbers. Chemical levels far beyond the lethal limits for 90% of the species present. Biological agents classified by Galactic Treaty as extinction-grade pathogens. Heat levels matching the magma zones of a young planet. The food alone. The container of lunch was officially classified as a Class Red biohazard. Then the scanners showed the human's internal biology. The food was not harming him. It wasn't even causing mild distress. It was being broken down. The human thought for a moment, tapping his chin. "Depends on the week," he said. "If I'm busy, maybe 2 or 3 times. The chamber filled with a stunned, suffocating silence. The human, misinterpreting their shock as impatience, closed the lid on his container. The click was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. He stood up. "Sorry," he said, offering a polite smile. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Long meetings just make me hungry." The council did not respond. The Galactic Deathworld Council chamber had never felt so small. Just moments ago, it had been a grand symbol of power, a place where the fates of stars were decided. Now, it felt like a trap, shrinking with every passing second. The reason for this shift in atmosphere stood calmly beside the central table. A human, arms relaxed, expression completely neutral. In front of him sat a simple, closed container of food. Yet its mere presence filled the room like a silent, ticking threat. The Arbiter, the highest authority in the council, raised one chitinous claw. "Begin full analysis," it ordered, its voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "Maximum level." Immediately, the chamber's advanced scanners activated, far stronger than before. Thin, precise beams of light passed through the container, dissecting its contents from every angle. Other beams focused on the human's body, mapping every cell. Some even scanned the very air, searching for any stray molecules. The grand lights of the chamber dimmed as power was diverted to the humming machines. Screens around the council members flickered to life, flooded with streams of incomprehensible numbers. At first, the data meant nothing to them. Then, the automated warnings began to flash, one after another, each more alarming than the last. Toxic compound concentration rising. Protein density exceeds safe limits. Significant heat residue detected. Unknown microorganisms active. A geolarn scientist, a species known for their meticulous analysis, shot up from its seat, its frills shaking. "These readings are impossible," it chittered. "This substance, it cannot exist as a food source. It violates fundamental biochemical principles." Another scientist, a crystalline being from the Cygnus arm, zoomed in on a microscopic image. "Those microorganisms," it whispered, its voice like the grinding of stones. "They are alive, still active." The Arbiter's voice hardened, cutting through the rising murmur of disbelief. "Clarify." The geolarn scientist swallowed audibly. "They are bacteria," it said, its voice trembling. "Highly aggressive, with a reproductive rate that is alarming. On most civilized worlds, a sample like this would trigger an immediate, planet-wide quarantine." The Arbiter slowly turned its multifaceted gaze from the screen to the human. "You consume living hazards?" it asked, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. The human simply tilted his head, a gesture the translator struggled to define. "Yeah," he said, his voice casual. "Cooking kills most of them. Mostly." That single word, "mostly," echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Several council members physically recoiled in their seats. One, a gelatinous ambassador, hastily activated an emergency medical stasis field around its personal pod. The scanners continued their relentless work, now delving deeper, analyzing the raw chemical makeup of the food. They found acid strong enough to melt the organic armor plating. A Vacathar shock trooper. They identified natural toxins, refined and concentrated through the application of intense heat. They mapped complex fat, structures designed to store colossal amounts of energy, far beyond any known nutritional requirement. One council leader, a being of pure energy, flickered erratically and whispered to its neighbor. "This is not nutrition." The neighbor, a silicon-based life form, replied in a low thrum. "It is controlled poison." Just then, the human's own biological scan appeared on a display next to the food data. The council had expected to see evidence of catastrophic damage, severe internal burns, widespread cell death, total organ failure. They saw none of it. Instead, the skin revealed something far, far worse. The human body was not just surviving the onslaught, it was processing it. It absorbed the toxins, neutralized them with specialized enzymes, and efficiently broke them down into usable energy. The potent acids were rendered harmless within his digestive tract. The residual heat was dispersed harmlessly through a highly efficient thermoregulatory system. And the aggressive, quarantine-level bacteria? They were being systematically hunted and destroyed by an immune system that treated them as a minor nuisance. A Vorlag scientist, known for its evolutionary biology expertise, lowered its data slate in utter shock. His internal systems are prepared, it stated, its voice filled with awe and terror, not resistant. Prepared. The Arbiter's eyes narrowed to slits. Explain. The scientist took a shaky breath. This is not a case of simple survival adaptation to a harsh environment, it clarified. This is the product of long-term, deliberate evolutionary design. This is a blueprint for a species that thrives on lethality. Another scientist, from a species that had evolved in sterile, underground caverns, joined in, its voice thin and reedy. His species did not evolve to avoid danger, it said, pointing a trembling appendage at the screen. They evolved to live inside it, to consume it. A profound, unnerving silence fell over the council. The weight of this revelation was crushing. The Arbiter looked back at the human, the seemingly unremarkable biped who had just appended their understanding of life itself. You claim this substance is normal, the Arbiter said, each word carefully chosen. For your species. The human nodded again, a simple, affirmative gesture. Pretty normal, he replied. Some people like it spicier. That last word caused several of the council's universal translators to glitch, to pause as they searched for a proper equivalent. Spicier, the Arbiter repeated, the translator finally offering a crude definition. The human smiled, a baring of teeth that now seemed predatory. Yeah, it means more heat, more pain. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. Pain was not a flavor. Pain was a universal biological warning signal. Pain meant damage, injury, system failure. Pain meant death. A council member from a species of peaceful herbivores slammed its heavy claws on the polished floor. No species chooses pain, it roared. Pain is failure. It is the body screaming that it is dying. The human just shrugged, a casual motion of his shoulders that conveyed a universe of difference. Depends on how you grow up, he said simply. Just then, the scanners beeped one last time, with a final, chilling piece of data. They had cross-referenced the human's genetic markers with Earth's paleontological records. The screen displayed images of colossal predators, global extinction events, and ages of volcanic fury. And running through it all, a single, unbroken line of ancestry. The Geolarn scientist looked at the timeline, its frills flat against its head in submission. They survived all of this, it whispered. They watched monsters die and worlds burn. And they took notes. The Arbiter stared at the human, at the calm, unassuming creature whose ancestors had dined on poison and seasoned their meals with pain. It finally understood. They were not dealing with a new species seeking entry into the galactic community. They were dealing with the inheritors of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, and failed, and in doing so, had created something far more dangerous than any beast in its fossil record. The human, noticing the silence, finally broke it. So, he asked, gesturing to the container, anyone want a bite? It's chilly. The system pinged, signaling the completion of its analysis. New data flooded the screens, and a hush fell over the great chamber. The council leaned forward as the system began its breakdown of the human stomach contents. What it found was, to put it mildly, terrifying. It wasn't just the recent meal. The scanners detected traces of other, far more dangerous substances. Old toxins, long dormant but still present. Chemical residues from meals consumed not days or weeks ago, but years. The data painted a picture of a creature that regularly ingested poisons. One scientist, a Xylician with 3 trembling eyes, whispered to its colleague, this can't be a one-time exposure. The build-up, it's systemic. The other, a silicon-based life form from Cygnus X1, finished the thought, its crystalline form vibrating with unease. This is routine. The chamber's grand arbiter, a being of immense age and wisdom, let its voice drop to a near-inaudible whisper, a sound that still carried to every corner of the room. How many toxic worlds does your species visit? It asked, its gaze fixed on the lone human. The human, a man named Harris, simply frowned. Visit? He repeated, a note of confusion in his voice. "We don't visit them. We live on one." An absolute, bone-chilling silence descended upon the chamber. It was as if the very air had frozen solid. The council members had all read the initial intelligence reports on Earth, of course. They'd reviewed the atmospheric data, the geological surveys, the ecological summaries, and, almost universally, they had dismissed them as hyperbole, as exaggerated tales spun by overeager scouts. But now, the biological data scrolling across their screens matched those fantastical stories, point for terrifying point. The reports had spoken of a planet with unusually high gravity, placing constant, crushing stress on its inhabitants' musculoskeletal systems. They mentioned an unstable climate, prone to violent, unpredictable weather patterns that could shift from scorching heat to freezing blizzards in a matter of hours. They described apex predators designed with brutal efficiency, evolved for one purpose, to kill. They detailed flora that actively produced neurotoxins and flesh-dissolving acids as defense mechanisms, and fauna that hunted not just for sustenance, but for sport. The scanners, now cross-referencing Harris's biology with the planetary data, confirmed it all. Earth wasn't a borderline death world, a class for hazardous environment as they had initially classified it. It was so much worse. It was a category all its own. One of the council leaders, a towering insectoid being from the Cetus constellation, slowly rose to its full height, its multifaceted eyes blinking rapidly. "Our worlds," it began, its voice a series of melodic clicks and whistles translated by the chamber's universal system. "Our curated environments, we have danger, yes, but it is controlled. We introduce challenges to stimulate evolution, but they are managed for optimal survival." It turned its head, a full 180 degrees, to look directly at Harris. Your world is chaos." Harris sat there for a moment, considering the statement. He thought of rush hour traffic, of black swan events in the stock market, of trying to assemble flat-pack furniture with poorly translated instructions. He thought of hurricanes, mosquitoes, and the simple, unpredictable nature of life. "Yeah," he said with a slight nod. "That sounds about right." The Arbiter turned away from the human, a subtle tremor running through its ethereal form. "For thousands of cycles," it said, its back to the assembly, "our galactic consensus was that humans were a fragile, ephemeral species, soft-skinned, short-lived, emotionally volatile." It turned back, its luminous eyes sweeping across the stunned faces of the council. "We were wrong." Just then, the scanners completed their final analysis. A new symbol, stark and red, pulsed on every screen in the chamber, overriding all previous data. The text was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 starships, human biology, extreme adaptive species, and, below that, a line that sent a fresh wave of confusion and fear through the onlookers. Threat level, context, dependent. The Xylosian scientist stared at the words, its three eyes wide with incomprehension. "Context dependent," it stammered. "What does that even mean?" Its colleague, the silicon being, answered in a low, somber tone. "It means they are only dangerous when challenged." The Arbiter waved a slender appendage, dismissing the scanner displays. The harsh red lights vanished, and the chamber's normal, ambient glow returned. But the feeling in the room did not. The chill remained, deeper and more profound than before. Harris, seemingly oblivious to the existential dread he had just created, sat back in his chair and stretched. "So, are we done here?" he asked, glancing at his wrist-mounted device. "I've got another meeting across the station in 20 minutes, something about trade tariffs on refined proteins." No one answered. The council members just stared, their minds racing. They had one final, terrible question. A question that had been forming since the first toxicological report appeared, but no one wanted to be the one to ask it. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, the Arbiter broke it, its voice slow and heavy, as if each word was a physical weight. "Mr. Harris," it said, "if this cocktail of poisons and residues is what you consume for a casual lunch." It paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "What happens when your species prepares for war?" Harris looked up from his device. The easy-going, slightly bemused expression was gone. For the first time since he had entered the chamber, he did not smile. His eyes were cold, and his voice, when he spoke, was flat and devoid of any warmth. "You don't want to see that," he said, and with those 6 simple words, silence swallowed the chamber whole. It was no longer the silence of shock or confusion. It was the silence of pure, undiluted fear. It had found fertile ground in the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful beings, and now it had fully taken root. The age of human fragility was over. A new, far more terrifying age had just begun. The council chamber remained silent long after the human spoke. No one moved. No one dared to breathe easily. The Deathworld Council had faced down galactic warlords. They'd witnessed plagues that wiped out entire systems, and they had charted the collapse of stars. But now, in the sterile quiet of their most sacred hall, they faced something far more unsettling. They faced the truth. The Arbiter, a being of ancient wisdom and immense power, slowly raised its primary claw. The sound of chitin on air echoing in the stillness. Display human origin world. Its voice resonated, deep and commanding. Full historical record. In the center of the chamber, the main holographic display flickered, then stabilized. A planet of mesmerizing blue and vibrant green appeared, spinning slowly in the void. At first glance, it was beautiful. Deep, swirling oceans, wispy white clouds, continents blanketed in lush forests. A few of the council members, their forms varied and alien, visibly relaxed. It looked like a paradise world. Then, the data overlays began to appear, painting a very different picture. Numbers and charts cascaded over the image. Gravity levels, 9.8 meters per second squared, a figure far, far above the galactic standard. Tectonic instability, constant, high-level seismic activity. Atmospheric conditions, violent, unpredictable storms of staggering scale. Extreme temperature shifts, from scorching deserts to frozen tundras. One of the council's chief scientists, a spindly being with multiple ocular sensors, leaned forward, its gaze fixed on the gravity readings. That gravity alone, it chirped, its voice tight with disbelief, would crush most council species within a matter of hours. Their skeletal structures couldn't withstand it. The display obediently zoomed in, plunging beneath the clouds to the surface. Predators appeared. First, large creatures with razor-sharp claws, powerful jaws filled with teeth, and terrifying speed. Then, smaller, more insidious threats, creatures armed with potent neurotoxins and masters of camouflage, blending perfectly into their surroundings. The view shifted again, showing creatures that hunted in coordinated packs and solitary hunters of unmatched ferocity. A low murmur of unease rippled through the council chamber. "These are native fauna," one of the military leaders asked, its voice a low growl. "Yes," the scientist replied, its sensors still scanning the data. "All evolved naturally on the planet, coexisting." The screen shifted again, this time focusing on the planet's flora. What should have been a display of peaceful vegetation was just as hostile. Plants covered in vicious thorns, leaves laced with deadly toxins, stems protected by sharp spikes. An array of complex chemical defenses designed to harm or kill anything that tried to eat them. Even the vegetation on this world was locked in a constant, brutal war for survival. Another scientist, a gelatinous being that communicated through modulated light patterns, spoke up. Its light flashed in urgent, worried pulses. On most civilized worlds, danger is a rare anomaly, an exception to the rule of peace. On this world, on Earth, danger appears to be the constant, the fundamental state of existence. Throughout this entire revelation, the human envoy stood quietly at his podium, his expression unreadable. He watched the council, not the screen. He had lived this reality. The display changed once more, this time showing the planet's raw, untamed power. Natural disasters. A supervolcano erupted, spewing ash and fire, choking the sky for thousands of miles. An earthquake, massive in scale, shattered the landscape, raising mountains and swallowing cities whole. A hurricane, a swirling vortex of unimaginable power, swallowed an entire coastline. Wildfires, sparked by lightning, consumed forests the size of small continents. Several council members physically turned away from the screen, unable to watch the sheer destructive force. "This world is unstable," one diplomat whispered to their neighbor. "It is chaos. No intelligent species could possibly survive here, let alone achieve sentience and spaceflight." A soft sound cut through the murmuring. The human cleared his throat. All eyes snapped to him. His voice was calm, steady, yet it carried an undeniable weight. "We didn't just survive," he said. "We adapted." The Arbiter gestured for silence with its claw, its gaze locked on the small, soft-skinned creature who stood before them. "Continue," it ordered the archive. The display now showed the dawn of humanity. The council saw small, fragile-looking bipeds. They were weak. They had no natural claws, no armored shells, no venomous fangs. They were surrounded on all sides by the death and danger the council had just witnessed. Logically, their extinction should have been swift and certain. But instead, the council saw something else, something that defied their understanding of evolution. They saw these early humans pick up rocks. Then, They saw them sharpen sticks into spears, and then they saw fire. A collective stiffening went through the chamber. Fire. On many worlds, the uncontrolled creation of fire was a forbidden technology, too dangerous, too chaotic. But the humans weren't just creating it, they were mastering it. The display showed them using fire to cook meat, neutralizing poisons and killing harmful bacteria, turning a dangerous meal into safe sustenance. They used it to forge tools, to clear land, and to keep the terrifying predators of the night at bay. They were turning danger into a tool. They were making danger edible. One of the scientists spoke again, its voice slow, filled with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. They learned to change their environment to suit their needs. Instead of fleeing from it or being crushed by it, they bent it to their will. The display continued to roll, showing the humans' relentless progression. They built shelters that withstood the planet's fury. They developed agriculture, taming the hostile flora. They domesticated some of the less aggressive predators. They formed societies, not out of a desire for simple community, but as a weapon for collective survival. Every step of their history was a battle against a planet that seemed to actively want them dead. And at every step, they had not only survived, but they had won. They had thrived. The Arbiter finally turned its gaze from the screen to the human. For the first time, the Council saw not a weak, primitive species, but a race of survivors forged in the crucible of a world that should have killed them. They were the children of chaos, the masters of adaptation. The human met the Arbiter's gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't need to say another word. The truth was now on display for the entire galaxy to see, more powerful and more intimidating than any weapon they could have imagined. And the galaxy was, for the first time in a very long time, afraid. The footage rolled on, a silent testament to a species unlike any the Council had ever witnessed. Humans, small and seemingly fragile, were shown hunting creatures many times their own size. Not just hunting, but coordinating, working in packs with a shared intelligence that was both terrifying and fascinating. They would track, they would plan, they would lay traps, and sometimes they would fail. The Council watched as hunts went wrong, as humans were thrown, gored, or simply outmaneuvered. They saw pain etched on human faces. They saw broken bones, deep wounds, and the profound grief of loss. But what shocked them most was that the humans did not stop. After every failure, after every injury, they would regroup, tend to their wounded, and try again. They learned from their mistakes with a grim determination. One of the Council leaders, a being of crystalline structure that shimmered with contemplative light, broke the silence. They treat pain differently, it observed, its voice a series of soft, resonant chimes. They accept it as a part of their existence, not as a signal to cease all activity. The Arbiter, the ancient and respected head of the Council, nodded its multifaceted head slowly. Pain teaches them, it said, its voice a low hum that vibrated through the chamber. And fear does not stop them. It only seems to make them more cautious, more clever. The display accelerated, jumping forward through millennia of human history. Civilizations rose from dust, creating wonders of art and architecture that drew gasps from the assembled aliens. Then, just as quickly, they fell. The Council watched in horror as wars consumed entire generations, as plagues swept across continents leaving unimaginable devastation in their wake, and as famines turned verdant lands into barren wastelands. Yet, through it all, humans remained. They rebuilt. They endured. They multiplied. A Council scientist, a specialist in species extinction events, whispered to its neighbor in disbelief. Any one of these catastrophes would have been a filter event, enough to end most species we have on record. They have faced dozens. The lone human in the chamber, who had been standing silently, finally spoke. His voice was soft, yet it carried an undeniable weight that cut through the silence. On Earth, he said, we have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Bad times don't end you, they train you. There was no argument from the Council. The evidence was irrefutable, playing out before their very eyes. The data stream continued, showing the relentless march of human ingenuity. They developed complex medicines to fight off invisible killers, to mend shattered bodies. They engineered colossal structures to tame rivers, to withstand the planet's fury. They developed technology that allowed them to leave their world, to survive in the lethal vacuum of space. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. A new screen appeared, comparing Earth's environmental and biological threats to all known death worlds in the galactic record. To the Council's astonishment, Earth ranked near the very top, not because it was consistently lethal like a radioactive wasteland or a high-gravity giant, but because its dangers were so varied, so unpredictable, and so constant. It never stopped being dangerous. One of the scientists, a being with delicate, frond-like appendages, shook its head in confusion. Our worlds are controlled, it said. We manage our ecosystems. We remove existential threats. It is the logical path for any advanced civilization. Another council member, whose species had long ago conquered disease and predation, finished the thought. They keep theirs. They live among them. All eyes turned to the Arbiter, who then turned its gaze to the human. Why? The Arbiter asked, the simple question echoing with the weight of galactic history. The human paused, considering his answer carefully. Because removing all danger makes you weak, he said finally, and Earth doesn't forgive weakness. The Council absorbed this profound statement. It ran counter to every principle of their own societies, which prioritized safety, stability, and the elimination of risk above all else. As if to illustrate his point, a new layer of data filled the screens. It was a montage of human culture. The Council saw competitive games where athletes pushed their bodies to the absolute limit, risking serious injury for a trophy. They witnessed extreme sports, humans jumping from cliffs, skiing down treacherous mountains, surfing monstrous waves. They were shown grueling military training, exercises that induced pain and exhaustion by choice, all in the name of preparation. This was the breaking point for some in the Council. The concept was utterly alien. They seek danger for enjoyment? One of them cried out, its voice filled with a mixture of horror and disgust. They inflict pain on themselves voluntarily? The human offered a faint, knowing smile. It keeps us sharp, he explained. It helps us feel alive. Silence descended upon the chamber once more. The Arbiter looked. Weary. It had presided over countless hearings, judged hundreds of species. But this was different. For cycles, it said, its voice heavy with revelation, we have operated under the belief that species from Deathworlds are defined by their ability to survive. We saw them as brutish, tough, and single-minded. It gestured a clawed hand toward the screens, where the data streams had coalesced into a single, poignant image. A human infant, a toddler, learning to walk. It wobbled on unsteady legs, took a step, then fell with a soft thump. It began to cry, its face contorted in frustration and mild pain. But then, with tiny, determined hands, it pushed itself up. It stood again, ready to try once more. The Arbiter stared at the image, mesmerized. That, it said, its voice barely a whisper, is your entire species, encapsulated in one single moment. And in that instant, the Council finally understood. It wasn't about simply surviving the fall. It was about the ingrained, instinctual, absolute necessity of getting back up. Humans weren't built to avoid harm. They were built to recover from it. Their strength wasn't in their toughness, but in their resilience. The human representative stood up straighter, his presence seeming to fill the room. You invited me here to judge my species, he said, his voice now firm and clear. To decide if we were a threat, or perhaps, to decide if we were weak and insignificant. He slowly looked around the grand chamber, meeting the gaze of several council members. Now you know why we are the way we are, why we eat what we eat, why we fight how we fight, and why we never, ever give up. No one disagreed. The evidence was overwhelming. Suddenly, a shrill alarm echoed through the chamber, a piercing sound that signified a grave emergency. A council aide, its movements frantic, rushed forward to the Arbiter's podium. Emergency transmission. Honored Arbiter, it stammered. A foreign empire has been observing this meeting. They've been monitoring our data feeds. The Arbiter's form stiffened, its calm demeanor vanishing in an instant. What is their response? It demanded. The aide hesitated, its appendages trembling. They believe the human is bluffing, it said. They believe this is all an elaborate deception. They are planning a test of humanity's resolve. The chamber erupted into chaos. Voices rose in protest and fear. Urgent, panicked whispers filled the air. This was a catastrophic development. The human, however, remained preternaturally calm. He simply closed his eyes for a brief moment and sighed softly. Someone always does, he murmured, as if this was the most predictable thing in the universe. The Arbiter raised its claw, slamming it down for silence. This meeting is adjourned, it declared, its voice booming with authority. Immediately, council members began to scramble from their seats, their earlier intellectual curiosity replaced by primal fear. Some avoided looking at the human, as if he were now the harbinger of their doom. Others looked at him with a newfound, profound respect, seeing not just a representative, but the embodiment of everything they had just witnessed. The human calmly walked over and picked up the empty food container he had brought with him. As he turned to leave the now emptying chamber, he spoke one last time. his voice a calm, chilling promise that hung in the air. If they test us, he said, they'll learn the same lesson Earth teaches everyone. He didn't need to elaborate. In the silent, panicked minds of the council, they already knew what that lesson was. Failure is not an option. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown.